curving path that's designated on this drawing. It arches and comes down through a patio area directly to the rear of the main house at 360 Rockingham. You walk past this, and there's bungalows or pool houses to the southern, that would be the southeastern corner of the property.
Where did you go?
I was not leading the group. Detective Phillips was in front, and he knocked on the first bungalow door. Prior to him knocking, there was louvers on the front door. He looked inside and saw a male lying on the bed. I remember him looking back saying, there's a guy laying on the bed. He knocked on the door, and the male got up and answered the door.
Did you make contact with the person that answered the door?
I did eventually, not at that exact moment.
Detective Phillips spoke to him?
Detective Phillips explained the situation, that there was a possible emergency and we needed to find out if anybody was in the house and if everybody was okay if they were.
And what was the male's response?
I don't know if anybody's in the house, and then he referred to the next bungalow where, well, O.J.'s daughter, Arnell, is in the next bungalow.
So that's what he said? What you're
Yes.
reporting is, I don't know if anybody's in the house. That's what he said?
Yes.
Okay. And when he directed you to Arnell's place, what did you do?
Well, I stayed with, we call him Kato, and Mr. Kaelin. I stayed with him, and the other three detectives went to Arnell Simpson's.
You subsequently found out his name, of this person you've been referring to, as Mr. Kaelin?
Yes.
And what was the name, Kato?
That's the nickname he goes by.
When he referred you all to Arnell's room, did the others then leave and go to that direction?
Yes.
And you stayed?
Yes.
Why?
Well, I didn't know who Mr. Kaelin was, and I wasn't sure if he was even supposed to be there. I stayed with him and engaged him in a conversation about who he was and what he was doing there, and a few other things.
So you were trying to determine if he was an intruder?
Well, I think there was an officer safety issue for myself and the detectives. We really couldn't leave somebody just standing there. We didn't really know much about the crime scene at Bundy, and we didn't know anything what was going on Rockingham, so no, I couldn't.
Did you go into his guest room?
Yes.
Can you describe his appearance, the appearance of Mr. Kaelin at the time you saw him?
Well, he was disheveled. He was just woken up. His eyes were bloodshot. His hair was mussed. He seemed disoriented, as I suppose anybody would be if they're woken up at that time of the morning.
Okay, did you ask his permission to go into the guest room?
I asked him if I could look around. He said yes.
Did you have a conversation with him at that time?
Yes, simultaneous with, I walked to the bathroom, which I couldn't see into from where I was standing inside the doorway. I walked in just to make sure nobody was in there, and I opened up the closets to make sure nobody was standing in the closets. I engaged him in conversation while I was doing that. I noticed a pile of clothes to the, if you were lying in the bed, it would be the right side, next to the right side of the bed, and a pair of shoes. I asked him if those are the clothes he wore, and he said, last night, and he said yes. I said, mind if I look at them? He said no. I picked up the shoes, I looked at the soles. I picked up the clothes, and I looked at the clothes. There didn't appear to be anything unusual about them. I put them back where they were, and I was still talking to Mr. Kaelin. I asked him if there's anything unusual that happened that night. Before he answered, before I let him answer, I asked, who drives a Bronco? He says, well, that's O.J.'s. I said, is that all? Is that the only person that drives it? And he goes, yeah. I asked him if there was anything unusual that happened the previous night. And he said, well, about 11:15, I heard some crashing on my wall. And I thought there was going to be an earthquake, but that was the only noise. Just one time my picture shook, and he pointed to a picture that was just to the west of his bed, which would have been at the far right of the room, looking into his room from the doorway. And then he said, I went outside to see what was going on with the noise, and I saw a limo at the gate. At that point, I interrupted him, and I took him into the house where now Mr. Simpson's daughter and the 3 detectives had already entered the rear of the residence, and the door was open.
Did you ask him whether or not he knew if the defendant had driven the Ford Bronco that night?
I believe I asked him, but I don't believe he answered. I think he said he didn't know or he didn't remember.
So you brought Kato into the house?
Yes.
Where did you put him?
There's a bar inside, it looks like a recreation room, a billiard room. And just to the right of that, as you're entering the rear of the residence, there's 4 or 5 bar stools. I said, why don't you sit here for a second? One of the detectives is going to talk to you in a few minutes. Just sit here and relax. I continued towards the front of the residence, and right by the kitchen, I saw Detective Van Adder, and I told him, I says, talk to the man that was in the bungalow. He's seated at the bar. And I continued out the front of the residence.
Why?
Well, I was, from the statement he made, the crashing sound, and the time that he heard it, combined with the blood in the Bronco, the way I was feeling is there's a possibility there could be another victim or a suspect that had collapsed or escaped via that route on the southern border of the house.
What time was it that Kato said he heard that thump on the wall?
He said about 11:15.
And did he show you where on the wall that thump seemed to have come from?
There was a, right behind the head of his bed, there's a space in the wall. Right at the edge of his bed, there's an air conditioner, and to the far left of his bed, there would be the picture. He heard the crash right in that area.
In between where and where?
Between the air conditioner and his picture, right behind his head, which would have been probably 2 feet to the west of the air conditioner vent.
And did he point out the picture that he said he saw move when the thump occurred?
Yes, I believe it was the only picture in the room.
Now that wall that he pointed out to you as being the wall where the thump came from, could you tell where the exterior of that wall faced in terms of the property?
Well, I couldn't at that point. I had to go outside and become a little oriented with the layout of the house. I've never been at the southern border of that house. So I exited the front of the residence and I went to the southern border of the house, and I looked down and I saw a cement path a couple of feet wide with a 3.5, 4 foot cyclone fence running on the property line between the house to the south and the Simpson residence.
Can you see that portion of the property on the defense diagram in front of you?
Yes, I can.
Can you please point it out?
Yes, if you come out of the front entrance,
Can the court see?
Actually, no.
if you come out of the front of the entrance of the home, you're going directly west. As soon as you get to the driveway, you go directly south. You walk past the garage. I guess you'd have to swing out. Go past the garage. When you reach a cyclone fence, it's the southern portion of the property. And then you go east, and then you're running along the garage. There's a little indentation for the maid's quarters. And then you get into another structure. It looks like the beginning of the bungalows, but it's not. You go a little farther, and there's another indentation, and then you can see a connecting corridor, which is an office stairway area, and then there's Kato's room.
And that's indicated as Kato's room on the diagram?
Yes, and there's another way you can tell. As the bungalows start, they have a sheer wall on the southern border. It goes up, I would probably say, 20 feet, 15, 20 feet, and it has a single pitched roof that slants in towards the pool. The rest of the structure doesn't have that type of architecture. So at that point, I knew that that was approximately that wall, and there was also an air conditioning unit that was sticking out.
Overhanging the walk?
Yes, I think it was even braced.
And did that appear to be the air conditioning unit that you'd seen on the inside of Cato's guest house?
Well, to the best of my estimations on where it would be, yes, and I didn't see any other air conditioning duct in that general area.
So did you walk over to that location near the air conditioner
Yes,
on the outside?
yes.
Did you see anything that drew your attention?
Yes, as I walked closer and I got oriented to where this noise probably came from, I looked down and I saw a dark object. I was probably still 15, 20 feet away, and I kept walking closer, and then I saw when I was a few feet away that it was a glove.
Now, when you went back there, what were you actually looking for? What were you expecting to find?
Well, I thought somebody had collapsed back there.
So looking for a body?
Yes.
Showing you the series of photographs here that have been marked as People's 9. Do you recognize the location shown in photographs A, B, C, and D?
Yes, I do.
And what is that location?
This is the walkway. I would be looking east from the front of the residence. I don't know how deep this lens makes it appear, but this would what I would be viewing from the front of the residence, looking directly east down the south border path of the residence.
And in B?
B is just a closer view of the same item. This dark object is the glove I discovered.
C?
C is, once again, a very close view in the condition of the surrounding walkway.
And D?
D is a very close-up view of the glove.
When you saw that glove, did it have some significance to you?
Yes, it looked very similar to the glove that I observed on Bundy hours before.
And based on that observation, sir, what did you do?
I looked at it a little closer. I noted that it did not match the terrain. As you can see, that there's a lot of dirt and leaves. This glove was not dirty in the least. It looked a little sticky and moist. 2 fingers were stuck to the glove. It looked like it was stuck there with some type of a liquid. I didn't touch it. I went past the air conditioning duct that you can see in photo A. And as soon as I went past that air conditioning duct, looking for the person that might have dropped this glove, thinking that they were farther down the walkway, I ran into spider webs immediately.
Which indicated what to you?
I would say nobody had walked on that path lately or recently, especially within hours, where I encountered no spider webs going up to the glove.
Only after the glove?
Only after the glove.
Having made those observations, sir, what did you do next?
I continued all the way east on this path, and then there was a probably 25 square foot area that looked like a plant potting area, or maybe a place where they start plants to put on the property. And I looked for any evidence of blood or a victim that had collapsed. I found that there was none, and I returned to the location and notified Detective Phillips of the find.
The find being?
The glove.
Did then Ron and Detective Phillips, Detective Lang, Detective Van Adder go out to look at the glove as well?
Individually, I took each one of them down to where I had found the glove, indicating what I saw as I went and what I did. I took Detective Phillips first, Detective Van Adder second, Detective Lang third.
If you know, sir, do you recall at what point a criminalist was called for to come to 360 Rockingham?
You mean what time did he arrive?
No. Do you recall, do you happen to know when he was called?
I don't have specific knowledge. I did not make any notifications on this.
At some point, did one arrive?
Yes.
And do you recall when that was?
I couldn't give you an exact. I'd say 8, 7:30, 8, 8:30. I'm not positive.
At some time after the glove was located, were you requested to secure the house for the purpose of getting a search warrant?
Yes, almost immediately after the discovery of the glove, within minutes, Detective Van Adder said, "This is now a crime scene. Seal it. I'm going to go write a warrant."
And seal it means what?
Protect the evidence that has already been discovered. Keep everybody out of the house. Ask the people that are in the house to please leave if they're not necessary personnel, and to protect the premises.
And was that done?
Yes.
Now, at the time in the house, do you recall who was there inside?
I can remember Mr. Cowlings was there, but I can't remember exactly what time he was asked to leave. I believe it was shortly after we decided that we had to write a search warrant for this residence. So I don't know specifically when he was asked to leave. Arnell was asked to leave the property. I believe Arnell contacted Mr. Cowlings, but I'm not sure on that. I have no knowledge.
So to the best of your knowledge, by the time the decision was made to secure the house and get a search warrant, Arnell was there, A.C. Collins was there?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Did you see any children there?
Yes, and I don't know whose children they were, and I don't know how that transpired.
But they were all there at the time the decision was made to get the search warrant?
Yes.
Thank you. I have nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
All right, we are going to take the afternoon recess. We'll take a 15-minute break at this time and start again just after 3:05.
Prepare any reports regarding your participation in this investigation?
No, I just took some preliminary notes while I was still at the scene before robbery homicide detectives arrived.
All right, and what did you do with those notes?
I gave them to Detective Phillips, and they were in turn given to Detective Van Adder and Lang.
And what did Detective Van Adder do with them?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Were they utilized in preparing any reports by Detective Van Adder that you're aware of?
Excuse me, I have no idea, sir.
Did you review any reports prepared by Detective Van Adder?
No, none.
Now, actually, you were the first homicide detective to arrive at the scene at 875 South Bundy, is that correct?
Yes, myself and Detective Phillips.
You both arrived at the same time?
Yes, we were riding together.
So you actually met at the station and then went to the scene?
Yes, we met at the station, got flashlights or briefcases, anything else we thought we might need. Got into a vehicle that had homicide kit in it and went to the scene.
All right. Now, ordinarily, the homicide detective then takes charge of the investigation, is that correct?
Yes.
You mentioned that at some point Detective Van Adder and his partner took over the investigation?
Yes, sir.
Why did that happen?
I believe it was told to me that Chief Frankel was notified of the VIP nature of the homicide and determined that it was beyond the scope of our abilities to handle it in a geographic division, and notified Robbery Homicide Division to respond with detectives to take over the investigation.
Okay, so the VIP division was called in to take over the investigation?
No, it's any type of a murder that will generate more logistical support than we're able to produce. Robbery homicide has the latitude of funneling a lot of people on an investigation and stick with it, where we still have cases that come up daily or weekly that would interrupt a large-scale investigation such as this.
And that decision was made based on the identification of the victim as Nicole Brown?
To the best of my
Objection,
knowledge,
that
sir.
calls for speculation.
Well, what
Sustained.
time was that decision made? When were you informed that...
Objection irrelevant.
Mr. Uelmen, you can finish your question.
What time were you informed that Detective Van Adder and Detective Lang were taking over the case?
I would probably say within an hour of my arrival.
Right. Had Detective Van Adder or Detective Lang arrived at the scene yet when you were informed of that?
No, I believe they arrived at, Van Adder arrived at approximately 4, and I believe Detective Lang arrived at about 4:25.
Now, when you arrived, had the scene already been secured?
Yes, sir.
Could you describe what securing the scene means? What does that term mean?
Well, the streets were closed off at Dorothy and Bundy. The street to the north, 1 block to the north, the alleys to the rear had been secured. The front of the residence, there was no traffic going northbound on Bundy from Dorothy. The residence had been secured with officers to the rear, officers to the front. There was a uniformed sergeant at the scene. I believe there were 6 officers that were at the scene. It was secured with crime tape, the police do not cross tape, the yellow tape, at all those locations.
So essentially, securing a scene means that it is totally blocked off so that no one other than the officers in charge have access to the scene. Is that correct?
Yes, we try to preserve it as much as possible.
And I believe you indicated that rather than walk through the scene or the portion of the scene where the victims were located, in order not to disturb that, you went around to the back?
Yes, the scene didn't appear that it would have been feasible to try to dodge evidence or the blood of the victims. We had to go around. It was too much of a jockey of too much of a balancing act to try to get around that. It wasn't necessary. We could have entered from the rear.
Okay. Now, when you went to the rear, you indicated you went in through the garage?
Yes.
The garage door was open?
Yes.
Had that been opened by officers, or was it open at the time they arrived at the scene?
I'm not positive on how it was opened or who opened it. I know that the officers got it open through the switch inside, and I do not know how that took place. I was informed that I believe one of the children showed the officer where the switch was, and I'm not positive on that.
So you actually went in through the house then and approached the crime scene from the rear?
I went in from the garage, walked next to the white Ferrari that was parked in the garage, and the door to the lower level of the house was open. I walked directly into a stairway, and I entered, and that placed me inside the kitchen.
From the kitchen, you went out to the walkway beside the condo?
Well, I was walking rather slowly. I was looking around. Although Officer Risky was leading us into this, showing us the scene from what he discovered, we're walking slow and we're looking for anything that would appear to be evidence or something that could possibly be evidence. And then, yes, we did walk from the interior to the exterior of the front door.
Now, at this point, it was still dark outside?
Yes.
Had any lights been set up to illuminate the scene of the homicide?
No, the lights from the open front door were cascading down onto the two victims, onto the stairway.
All right. And I believe you indicated that you walked out onto the sidewalk overlooking the scene where the bodies were located?
Yes, yes.
How far would you say you were from where the bodies were located?
I was directly above the female victim, which was probably 3 feet. The male victim would have been 10 feet, 12 feet.
All right. And from that vantage point, you first observed the glove that you told us about?
Not first, no.
When did you first observe it?
We had flashlights. We were looking at the female victim. We looked at the male victim. I noticed the glove when I walked around after I exited the residence the first time. I walked around to the side, or the north perimeter of the 875 Bundy. There's a iron fence, and through that iron fence you can get very close to the male victim. And looking there, I could see them down at his feet.
All right. The glove was located at the feet of the male victim?
Yes, at one of the feet.
Was it obscured by any sort of plant?
There was a plant that kind of cascaded over the top of one portion of it, yes. That's why it was easier to see from that location to the north.
All right. We have a photo which I will ask be marked as Defense Exhibit B.
All right.
Does that photo accurately depict the glove at the location where you saw it?
To the best of my recollection, yes.
All right. And you didn't actually pick the glove up to examine it, did you?
Not at that time, no.
How far away were you? I mean, what's the closest you came to examine this glove?
At the time, initially at the crime scene?
Yes, sir.
I'd probably say probably 5 feet, maybe a little longer than that, maybe as much as 6 feet.
Well, you indicated you were 10 to 12 feet away from the male victim, and the glove was lying at the feet of the male victim. Did you at some point get closer then?
Yes, I went to the north residence where the victim was almost up against that iron gate that separated the property at 875 to the residence townhome to the north. And when you walk on that walkway along that fence, that was not part of the crime scene. It didn't appear that there was anything that transpired on that location. You could walk there and get a very good view of the male victim and everything to his east.
Now, after Detective Van Etter arrived, I believe you said that was about 4 a.m.?
I believe so, yes.
There was some discussion of proceeding to the residence of Mr. Simpson, is that correct?
That's correct.
That decision was made within an hour after Detective Van Adder arrived?
Yes.
And how long after Detective Lang arrived?
I'd be within a half hour or thereabouts.
And at that time, Detective Phillips had told Van Adder and Lang about the relationship between Mr. Simpson and his former wife?
I don't have any knowledge of a discussion about their relationship, no.
Were you present when Van Adder or Lang were briefed about any of the circumstances of the victim?
Yes, but I wasn't there the entire time. I wasn't standing at their side the entire time they were discussing the situation.
Well, who made the decision to go and notify Mr. Simpson?
I believe it was Detective Van Adder at the direction of Commander Bushy of West Bureau, who was concerned that Mr. Simpson wasn't notified of the death by the media or a phone call. He wanted a personal appearance.
All right. Now, is this a routine in a homicide case that as soon as you've identified the victim, you notify the next of kin?
It's not that immediate in all cases, but I think in this case, if it was leaked to the media, I think it would be a pretty insensitive way for a family member to find out.
Certainly. Did you dispatch a patrol car to inform Nicole Brown's parents of her death?
Once I was relieved of the responsibility of the homicide, I didn't direct any units. I was under the direction of Detective Van Adder and Lang.
Right. So you're not aware of any procedure being undertaken to notify the parents of the victim?
No, sir, I'm not.
Once Mr. Goldman was identified, were detectives sent to break the news to his parents?
Like I said, sir, I wasn't privileged to knowing of any notifications, and I didn't notify anyone myself.
Were you aware that Mr. Simpson and his wife were divorced?
I think I had heard it, only because we work West LA.
Do you routinely notify the former husband of a homicide victim?
I think if there's children involved and we have the children, I think it would probably be the appropriate thing to do.
All right, so you are concerned about the disposition of the children as well?
Well, I believe a lot of the decisions of this came from the commander and Detective Van Adder, and I really wasn't privileged to that conversation, but I would believe that I would be concerned with the children and the ex-husband, since they still had joint custody of the children. We had the children at the police station. I think they were somewhat displaced by this at no cause of their own.
Did anyone suggest telephoning Mr. Simpson to notify him?
I'm sorry, I wasn't privileged to the discussion about notification at all.
Well, just explain to me why you felt it was necessary for 4 detectives to go to Mr. Simpson's home to notify him.
Oh.
Sustained.
All right. How many detectives went to Mr. Simpson's home?
4.
And who were those 4?
Myself, Detective Phillips, we were riding in one vehicle, and Detective Van Adder and Lang.
All right. So you were the 4 ranking detectives in charge of this investigation.
We were the only 4 detectives at this investigation.
All right. And you left the scene of the homicide to go to Mr. Simpson's home at about 5 in the morning,
Yes, sir.
leaving no detectives at the scene of the homicide.
And the scene was secured, and there was a supervisor at the scene. And I stand corrected. The lieutenant of detectives of West LA remained at the scene.
Now, what did you contemplate that these 4 detectives would do in terms of notifying Mr. Simpson? Did you feel that you all needed to be there to lend him support?
Not at all, sir. Detective Lang and Van Adder didn't know the area. They asked me if I knew where Rockingham was, and I said I did. And I led them to Rockingham. address.
So your purpose in going to the premises was to escort Detective Van Adder and show him the way to the location at Rockingham?
Basically, I was asked, do you know where the Rockingham address is? And I said, yes. He said, would you take us up there? And Detective Van Adder said, Ron Mark, lead us up there.
All right. And what was the purpose of Detective Phillips going?
He was my partner.
Oh, I see. So you never go to a location without your partner accompanying you?
No objection, that's argumentative.
Overruled.
Well, of course we do, but in this situation, there was no reason for him to stay at the scene. The two lead investigators were going to go make a notification. There was nothing for Detective Phillips to do at the scene. The Lieutenant Spangler was at the scene, and I believe 2 uniformed supervisors and more than 6 officers, and there was ample enough security there to preserve the scene.
So the purpose of yourself and Detective Phillips going to Mr. Simpson's residence was to escort Detective Van Adder and Detective Lang and make sure they didn't get lost. Is that correct?
Well, I don't think it was so much that as just to expedite the travel to the location.
You wanted to get to the location as quickly as possible.
No, I just don't think they wanted to drive around in the dark, and some of those streets are very confusing. I knew the way. It was very simple.
Had you been to Mr. Simpson's home before?
One other time, but I knew where Rockingham was.
And what was the occasion of your prior visit?
I went there on a call in 1985.
At the time you left the premises at Bundy and went to Mr. Simpson's home, was Mr. Simpson a suspect at all in the homicide that you were investigating?
Not in my mind.
There was no suspicion at all focused on Mr. Simpson in terms of any responsibility for this homicide?
Well, I wasn't thinking that, and if it was uttered to anybody, it wasn't uttered to me.
Now, could you describe the light conditions at the time you left the Bundy premises and went to Mr. Simpson's home?
You mean the unassisted light conditions?
Yeah, how dark was it?
Well, it was dark. Of course, it was becoming lighter, but it had not yet become a sunrise.
And you had your headlights on the cars that you were driving?
Yes.
How long did it take you to get from Bundy to Rockingham?
I'd say 5 minutes, maybe no more than 10.
So you arrived very shortly after 5 a.m.?
Yes.
Now, did all 4 of you initially go to the gate at Ashford and begin ringing the bell?
Yes.
I believe you indicated that several of you rang the bell at different times. Is that correct?
Yes.
About how long did that take?
Well, I believe we were ringing the intercom bell for probably 10, 15 minutes.
10, 15 minutes before an effort was made to locate West Tech?
I believe Detective Phillips was simultaneously doing some of that towards the end of our attempts to use the intercom.
Right. Now, initially, you were not concerned about the possibility of finding any victims or any suspects on the premises of Mr. Simpson's home. Is that correct?
Not at all.
Right. That concern didn't even occur to you until the observations you made on the Bronco.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you were the first one to walk over to the Bronco and look at it?
Yes.
We have a photograph here that we'll ask you marked as Exhibit C.
All right.
Which appears to be a photograph of the Bronco from a little further vantage point than the photos that have been previously identified. Thank you, if you could hold that up. Does that accurately depict the location of the automobile?
Pretty much, yes.
Is that how it was parked at the time you first saw it, shortly after 5 a.m. on June 13th?
I can't tell because the the thing that brought attention to the vehicle could only be seen if you were looking at it from the rear or the front. I don't even know if this is the same vehicle. I can't see the license plate. It's just a white Ford Bronco.
This is one of the crime scene photographs that was supplied as part of the discovery. Was the automobile moved before those photographs were taken?
Well,
No.
I'm going to object that there's no foundation. That looks, we don't know if that's a blow up. I don't know how the council knows personal knowledge what it is.
Well, is there some dispute as to whether that is a photograph that was provided to the defense? You don't know, is what you're saying?
The source of our photographs was simply photographs that were delivered to us as part of discovery crime scene photographs.
Well, apparently, you're going to have to establish that fact somehow, Mr. Uelmen.
Right?
No, Your Honor, I'm not trying to make this difficult for counsel. If you can just show me the original that this was blown up from, then I'll be glad to stipulate. I just don't recognize it in its current form.
In any event, the photograph from that vantage point.
Your Honor, so there's no dispute on this. The problem we have is these photographs were given to us in no order, with no numbers, and we got hundreds of them. So we had no way of categorizing.
From that vantage point, it appears to be the position the automobile was in when you encountered it.
Yes, sir.
All right? And that position,
Yes.
that position was on this chart, right where it says Rockingham Avenue, approximately where the letters C-K-I-N are,
That's correct.
pointing in a northerly direction.
Yes.
Okay. Now, while you were examining the automobile, what were the other three detectives doing?
When I walked away, Detective Phillips was still trying to make some phone calls on his cellular phone, and Van Adder and Lang were by the Ashford Gate.
Had any representatives of West Tech arrived yet at this time?
I believe there was one unit that had arrived, yes, and Detective Phillips had contacted them trying to get the phone number inside.
Now, the photographs that have been marked Exhibit 8, A, B, and C. These are also photos that were taken of the automobile as it was situated when you saw it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And these photographs were taken by the criminalists after they arrived on the premises?
Well, they were taken by the photographer, yes.
All right. In fact, the gentleman depicted in photograph A is the criminalist, Mr. Fung?
Yes, he is.
All right. And he's pointing in Exhibit A to the red stain that you indicate you encountered shortly after 5 a.m.
That's correct.
Now, you first observed that stain with a flashlight, is that correct?
Yes.
So it was still dark out?
It wasn't completely dark, but it was so dark that the naked eye would not bring up most objects, yes.
So without the flashlight to illuminate it, you would not have observed this stain at that time?
I can't say that I wouldn't have, but using the flashlight, it aided that it came to the forefront of what I was viewing.
Were there other stains elsewhere on the automobile that you also observed at that time?
Yes, I saw 4 reddish stains, very thin lines in photo A, right down where the door swings open and the frame is painted where there's a door sill. There's 4 little lines, to 3 or 4.
Brush marks you indicated,
They appeared to be brush marks,
and they were about a 1/4 inch long.
from what I could see, yes.
Were any photographs taken of those stains?
I believe there were, but as I said before, I wasn't directing the photographer.
Are those stains visible in any of the photographs there?
No.
Did you call those stains particularly to the attention of Detective Van Adder or any of the other detectives?
I brought it to the attention of Van Adder and Lang, yes.
At the time you discovered it?
Yes, sir.
Did you call it to the attention of any of the criminalists who later arrived at the scene?
I was not directing the criminalists on the Bronco. I did observe, I believe I did observe photo A being taken, but not from that angle. Other than that, I did not participate in the criminalists being directed to.
Do you have any
evidence.
explanation then why these stains are not referred to in any of the subsequent reports?
Not at all, sir.
Were there also some coffee stains on the car?
Coffee stains?
Coffee stains?
That morning?
Yes.
No, not at all.
You did not observe any coffee
No.
stains?
The car was very clean.
Now, you indicated that you believe these stains to be blood.
Yes.
Could you explain why you came to that conclusion?
Just the appearance of the stain. It looked like a red translucent stain that when you see dried blood, that's what it looks like.
Well, does dried blood look any different than dried taco sauce?
I don't take much note of dried taco sauce too many times, so I wouldn't know.
Well, it was just the color of the stain that led you to believe it was blood?
The color and just where it was, yes.
And in fact, there are a number of other substances that would leave stains of the same color and texture as blood, are there not?
Oh, I'm sure there is, yes. Dozens, hundreds.
Did you come to any conclusion whether this was human blood or animal blood?
I can't make that conclusion without a test.
You can't tell just by looking whether blood is from a human or from an animal.
No, sir.
And the stain that you're referring to at the door handle is pictured in photograph B, is that correct?
That's correct.
So it's this 1/4 inch speck about 2 inches above the door handle?
That would be fairly accurate, yes.
Now, after observing that speck, I believe you indicated that you became quite concerned that you may have a murder or a suicide on the premises at 360 North Rockingham?
That plus might have an additional victim.
All right. What was it about this stain that led you to that conclusion?
Well, it wasn't just the stain. I think it was the totality of what I was seeing. The vehicle was carelessly, haphazardly parked. It just didn't look right. It was looked like it was quickly turned into the curb. The rear end was jutting out into the street, several inches, if not maybe a foot, farther than the front. The right tires were turned into the curb. There's no parallel parking here. The person could drive right past his own driveway to park the vehicle.
Well, surely, whenever you see an automobile parked somewhat askance in front of a home, you don't conclude that there may be a murder or suicide on the premises, do you?
No, but when I'm coming from a double homicide and I find blood on a vehicle and then the haphazard way it was parked, I find a shovel and heavy plastic in the rear cargo area, I do have a concern for what do we have at this point. what is going on.
The shovel and the heavy plastic gave rise to these concerns for you as well?
Well, yes, sir. I did not know what the circumstances were at Bundy. That scene gave more questions than answers. And we did not know if we did not have a kidnapping at this point. We were virtually very much in the dark as to what the Rockingham address meant and what this blood meant.
All right. I'm still somewhat puzzled, Detective, by why what you saw on or in the car led you to conclude there may be a serious crime afoot on the premises. What connection did you see with the premises that you were about to enter?
Well, I think most of these things by themselves, excluding the blood, would not mean a lot. If the vehicle parked that way by itself would not mean a lot. The shovel, the heavy plastic would not mean a lot. The blood concerned me, and then when you couple all these items together with a package addressed to Mr. Simpson at that address, coming from a double homicide at his ex-wife's house, the possibility to me of a kidnap, a victim that got away from the scene, a murder-suicide, a hostage situation. I think they were all things that I have to consider and eliminate.
So the blood on the vehicle led you immediately to make some connection between this vehicle and the scene of the homicide you had left?
Well, I think the coincidence was more than a coincidence. Whoever was driving this vehicle had blood from themselves, or they had blood from another person.
Well, did that lead you to suspect then that perhaps the person who had driven that vehicle to the Rockingham address had been somehow involved in the homicide that you had observed at the Bundy address?
They could have been involved as a victim. They could have been involved as a suspect, as a hostage, as a kidnapped victim. I did not know, sir, and I could not conclude that from standing on the street.
I see. So the conclusion you came to was that whoever had been driving that vehicle was likely to be in the premises at Rockingham and have some connection either as a victim or a suspect in the homicide you had just left.
That or they had information. As I said before, I don't know how that blood got on that vehicle, and I don't know who drove the vehicle. I had my concerns, and I called the 3 other detectives over to show them my observations.
Now, at this time, you knew that the homicide you had left at Bundy had occurred prior to midnight the night before. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you were aware then that at least 5 hours and perhaps 6 or 7 hours had elapsed since the time of the homicide that you observed on Bundy.
That's correct.
Was the stain what suggested to you the immediacy of going directly into the premises at 360 North Rockingham?
Well, I think the totality of circumstances as a total picture gave me the concerns that I shared with Detective Van Adder, and we discussed those concerns, and we both agreed that we had a very sensitive emergency type situation that we had to do something. We could not
Right.
just stand on the street.
And how much time elapsed from the time you saw the speck of blood on the door until someone actually went over the wall?
5 to 10 minutes at the most. 5 to 10 minutes, I suppose.
5 to 10 minutes?
5 to 10 minutes.
So by this time, had the other detectives already attempted to call into the premises by telephone?
Yes.
They'd gotten the telephone number from Westmark,
West Tech.
West Tech?
Yes.
Were any uniformed officers called to the scene at that point?
At that point, no.
Isn't it routine when you feel you have an emergency that may involve victims or suspects to have uniformed officers present when you enter the premises?
No, it would be highly desirable for something, a planned tactical situation, hostage or a search warrant or arrest warrant, but it's not something set in stone, and I think the circumstances precluded us waiting for several minutes for a unit.
All right. Did you have available any public address system under which an announcement could be made to people inside the premises?
Oh, we probably had the ability to get on the loudspeaker on the police vehicle, but we could hear the ringing of the phone inside. We could also see that there was a light on. We had called inside the residence. Really don't believe that would do any good.
All right. Could you have called in a police helicopter at that point to view the premises from the air?
Why would we do that?
Well, if you were looking for victims or suspects on the premises?
I've never heard of that before, but I wouldn't personally do it.
All right. Did you feel at that point you had probable cause that criminal activity had gone on at the Rockingham premises?
I think I was personally more concerned with somebody bleeding to death inside. I just came from a scene of an extremely brutal murder.
All right. An extremely brutal murder 6 hours before.
Well, it was 6 hours before, but I don't know how long it takes for somebody to bleed to death.
Well, did you hear anything from within the premises that gave you any reason to believe that there might be somebody bleeding to death inside the premises?
Yes, from all indications, Mr. Simpson was not on a scheduled trip, and there was supposed to be a live-in maid there all the time. Nobody answered the intercom. Nobody answered the phone.
So what you heard from the premises was silence?
That's correct.
And the silence led you to believe that there may be a victim bleeding to death?
No. The totality of everything that we've seen since I arrived at the scene at 0210 hours on Bundy, that, and including everything that I observed, we discussed, and everything we attempted to do, we had a crossroads. We had an emergency situation, and we had exhausted all attempts to contact somebody inside, and we could not allow somebody to die while we stood outside. We made a
And
decision.
the totality of all of the circumstances.
Could the witness be allowed to finish his answer?
Could you finish what you were going to say?
Not really, Your Honor.
All right, why don't you
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead first?
please, go ahead.
It was, the last part of my sentence was the totality of the circumstances. The circumstances lent us more than just a belief, but an obligation to do something at that point.
Okay. And the totality of the circumstances was no one was answering the door or the ring at the gate, and you saw a 1/4 inch stain that appeared to you to be blood on the door and on the door jamb at the bottom of the door. Is that correct?
No, there's several things you left out. The shovel, the plastic, the way the vehicle was parked, the connection to the victim on Bundy, the blood on this vehicle. To be very truthful, I mean, we were concerned for Mr. Simpson more than we thought he was a suspect. We did not know many things at this time. We had to get onto that location to find out